Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. As always, we thank our patrons for making this podcast possible. We got several new patrons this past week.
I'm happy about that. So happy.
We're very thankful, and we do want to mention there are different tiers and different rewards for each tier. And some people might feel like, well, you know, the lowest is a $5 a month tier, and that won't really help. That's just not true. Every single patron helps keep this podcast going, all the expenses that are associated with it. So, and just the encouragement of having people stand behind us and talk to us.
Right.
So we really appreciate our patrons, and you guys really do keep this podcast going. We can't overstate that.
Right. Thank you so very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this week we wanted to talk about what happened with an episode that we had to delete for the first time in the history of us doing podcasts.
We did.
We're not going to mention any names, either of the church or the survivor, because we don't want to add any more stress to the survivor who spoke with us. But the short story is that we allowed her on this podcast, invited her on to tell her story, which was incredibly powerful. I think you and I were incredibly encouraged. Some of you probably heard the episode before we had to take it down. And I just want to start by saying what an honor it was to be able to sit and listen to this survivor story. And I feel that way every time that somebody shares their story with us. That's an honor and a privilege to be able to hear and give people that opportunity to validate their pain and their sorrow.
You're right, Jimmy, and it takes so much courage to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
And after you've been wounded so deeply, it's hard to tell your story. And it's hard to tell your story in a way that others can even understand just a little bit of it.
Yeah.
So you're right. It is a privilege and an honor just to be a listener. Simply listen.
And we don't take that lightly, ever. So when survivors want to share their stories with us, we never take that lightly.
No.
And you know, the fact that we're approachable enough for people to feel comfortable enough to share their story with us, I think speaks more to the survivor than it does to us.
Right.
I think it's just incredible to get to that point where you finally trust somebody to be able to share your story, because that does put you in a vulnerable place, especially on a platform like this, where you know that there are people listening, you know that that your story is going to be out there, so to speak. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage, and so it's always an honor to be able to hear.
It's hard to tell your
story.
It is. I find every time I've written a personal blog post, afterwards, I'm kind of wiped out, because when you share a part of what's on your heart, you never know how it's going to be received.
Right.
You never know. There are always people critiquing, always. And I know that. And there are always those people who don't quite believe that that's how it happened, you know, whatever it is. And so you put yourself out there. It's like you're putting yourself out there bare and just saying, here's my soul, here's what happened. Please encourage me.
And there's always that balancing act. Did I say too much? Did I say too little? Could I have said more?
Could I have said it differently? Could I have explained it differently?
So, you know, it's incredibly challenging, and our hats off to survivors who have the courage to tell their story, and we never want that to stop. With that said, It didn't take long at all. In fact, a matter of hours after we publish our podcast, for the bullies to come out of the woodwork from a church, and the first thing they did is threatened a lawsuit to the survivor. I can't tell you how much anger that welled up inside of me, because it's just it's more of the same old crap that we hear constantly. When survivors say the way that the churches handled my abuse was worse than the abuse itself, this is why.
It hurts again in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
You would hope that the church gets it, at least in part, and that they will at least listen, that they
Yes.
will at least be a bit sympathetic. And in the name of Jesus, you would hope that they would show compassion.
But they don't. And that's the problem. Not only is there a lack of compassion, and we talk about platitudes, and I hate the platitudes. Forgive your abuser, move on, all this stuff. It puts all the pressure on the survivor, and it lets the abuser off the hook. And in fact, I've written article after article about this. We've had podcasts about this. The abusers are coddled, and they really are. The abusers are generally, almost always, they're treated with compassion and kindness from churches. The most asked question that I get when I consult, not all the time, but the most asked question that I get is, how do we surround this brother, meaning the person who is the perpetrator? How do we surround this brother and encourage him through this? This is where the church's this is where the church's mind is, and so it's not that big of a surprise, but it's just so discouraging when you see churches turn into bullies, and that's what they are. I mean, there's no way around it. They're absolute bullies.
It's so hurtful because it's so far removed from what the church is supposed to be. And then we scratch our heads off and wondering, why is there not more church growth? Or why did this person leave? Why, and we kind of label them as being unforgiving and non-Christian in their thinking, not walking with God. And it's really hard when you've been wounded that deeply to not associate the person with Jesus. Does that make sense? It's often hard to read the scriptures and say, well, this is how I read I'm supposed to be treated in a case like this, but this is how I'm being bullied. Therefore, maybe this isn't even true. And that happens a lot. People's faith often gets really, really just stretched to the limits, to where often people go away just saying, if that's the church, I don't want it. And that, to me, that's the most heartbreaking of all.
It is. And
It is.
I just, a picture came to mind as you were talking here. And I remember we had Jules Woodson on. Jules is a friend of ours. Jules is the face of church too. She bravely told her story back in, I believe that was January of 2018, the same month as the Larry Nassar sentencing that was happening. And I still remember when Andy Savage got the standing ovation, and his pastor, the other lead pastor, and I can't remember his name now. Anyway, I still remember when he stood up the day that Andy got the standing ovation, and he had this rock in a box. It was like concealed in a box, and he opened it up real slow and dramatic and was like, "He who is without sin," he's looking right into the camera, "He who is without sin, be the first one to cast a stone." And clearly that was a dig at Jules Woodson for outing her abuser. The irony is that it's the church who's behaving like the mob in that story. That story is the woman who was caught in adultery. not alleged adultery. She was caught in the act of adultery. And she was brought before Jesus, and there's this mob, and they drag her, literally, physically drag her in front of Jesus and all these people as he's teaching. He had already been teaching. There's this massive crowd of people. And these bullies drag this woman to expose her sin in front of all the people. And then they say, somebody speaks up and they say, well, Moses commanded that we stone such women. What do you say? And that's when Jesus said, whoever's without this sin, be the one to cast the first stone. The irony in that story is that the churches, in situations like this, like what we're talking about, the churches are the bullies.
Right. They're crying out
and
for
the survivors.
Yeah,
the survivors are the ones that Jesus is defending.
Right.
And so
the angry mob, I always look at it as angry mob. We don't want to hear your story. Keep that to yourself. We want to be, the pure church. Leave us alone. We don't want blemishes being brought out, God forbid. We don't want the imperfections of people being brought out, God forbid. We just want to sit pretty on our hill and let our light shine.
Well, and the message is super loud and clear that the churches give, and that is, and they'll even say it, don't make the church look bad.
Yeah.
You're hurting the cause of Jesus when you paint us in a negative light.
It's so wrong, so far from what Jesus died for, really.
Yeah. But, I tell people it's not survivors telling their truth that makes the church look bad. It's the church's behaviors that make the church look bad.
Exactly right.
Right. And there was nothing in this episode that was said. There were no digs at the church. There was nothing that was said, I thought, that was unfactual. It was her telling her story, and she even read a letter verbatim that the church put out.
Exactly.
So it's not like this was made up.
No.
Her side of the story and stuff was made up about the church.
She prepared her story very well, I thought,
yes,
so that she wouldn't hurt intentionally anyone else.
Yes.
I thought she was respectful through the whole episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So this is what churches do, and this is why survivors don't speak up. I mean, this is it. I still remember the Benningers telling their story when they first started speaking up about their church, their former church, I should say, and the abuse cover-up, and they were getting doxxed. They had people showing up literally on their doorstep, threatening them.
Right.
They had breakdowns with their car, all kinds of vandalism, different kinds of things that were like these little subtle signs. And it's stuff that you hear about in the movies. And you're like, no, there's no way that Christians
would do something like that.
Are gonna, they're not gonna do that kind of stuff. But then I remember when we listened to our former Amish and Mennonite friends in that episode, and they talked about this mob within the plain churches, and they're like, you want to see violence, and you want to see people play dirty, and you want to see death threats. Speak up about abuse in the church.
It's awful, isn't it? It's awful.
It's crazy.
It's like, and you're right, Jimmy, so many have kept quiet for so many years for fear of all the repercussions that will come from telling the truth. And
it's not just repercussions, it's retaliation.
Retaliation,
it's full-fledged retaliation.
It is, and it's within Christendom, it's like it blows my mind.
But the irony is that these bullies are telling the survivors who endured abuse, you're making the church look bad.
Yeah. It makes no sense.
Do you not see the hypocrisy in that?
It makes no sense. But Jesus talked about this, and I can only think of the Pharisees, and when Jesus says you're like whitewashed tombs, you're so white on the outside and so black on the inside. And isn't that a good comparison of what's
Yeah,
going on?
it is.
I mean, when we can't hear the truth and be compassionate about it to the person who's been through a literal hell,
Mm-hmm.
and this stuff, this abuse doesn't last for just a season.
Mm-hmm.
It lasts forever and ever and ever. There are ripple effects
Yeah.
that stay with a person forever. The effects of abuse, physical or mental or spiritual, can alter the direction of a person's life
Mm-hmm.
forever.
Absolutely.
Forever. And it's like, wow, we don't want to blemish the name of the church. It's already been blemished.
Mm-hmm.
It's been blemished, and it's blemished worse by this retaliation.
It
Then,
is.
yeah, it is.
And, I want to say this before I kind of shift gears, and we want to shift gears and talk about what churches can do instead of bullying, threatening people with lawsuits, shutting them down, telling them you can't say anything about the church. I want to start by saying this. First of all, you know, we weren't straight out asked to take it down. We were just asked kind of for advice, and we were like, if this is even a question, let's pull it.
Right. Well, yeah.
Because one, we don't want survivors ever to have to go up against churches that are already threatening to sue. It's just it is a long, expensive, painful process, and two, we don't want to go through
No.
a lengthy, expensive lawsuit. We don't make a lot of money at all from podcasting, believe me. And we don't have the money and the time and the energy to do it. And so churches know this, which is why that's their first line of offense. Whenever they threaten people and they bully people, they hit them where it hurts, in the wallet. And because they know it's effective.
But that also hits in the heart. That'll stay with a person forever.
Yeah.
That I wasn't allowed to say my truth. That I was
Yep.
shut down.
Yep.
I was totally shut down. And it makes you feel, I don't know, little, weak, unvalidated.
Tired,
or
exhausted.
if that's the
Yep.
word that is the opposite of validated. And, unwanted,
Yeah.
unrecognized, non-valuable, all of those things.
Yeah. But I will say, I mean, this is why survivors rightfully sue churches, and that's it's because churches will stop at nothing to bully, intimidate, shame, tear down, harass
And this
survivors.
isn't all churches. We're not labeling.
No, but it's
all
a lot of
churches.
them. It's enough of
It is
them.
a lot. It is a lot.
It's a lot of them.
You especially have been very much tied to people who have been in cases like this
Oh yeah, and I've
over the past dozen years.
I'm not gonna
or
lie,
so.
I've become very
Yeah.
jaded towards the church too. Just in general, I think Christians, the Christian institutions are sick. They're
I think
very,
the
very
leadership
diseased.
really needs changed. The whole
Yeah.
leadership of churches, far from what the church was supposed to be.
Yeah. So, we don't want to leave this all on a bad note. I want to shift this around and say, what can churches do? Because I think there's a right and a wrong approach to this, and I think it's as simple as that. I don't think there's much in between. I think there's a right and a wrong approach to it, and I think the bullying, intimidation, fear tactics, threatening to sue people, telling people to forgive and move on, all of that kind of crap, obviously, I think is the wrong way to go. And I think that just opens you up to a massive liability. And you are almost guaranteed that if you go down that route as a church, as an institution, you're almost guaranteed the survivors, that they're going to fight. And they might or will or have found a way to sue you as a church. And I understand it. I get it. So what can you do, both to help the survivor and to limit your liability? Number one, at the top of the list, believe survivors. When they tell you, believe them. And this is the one thing that, unfortunately, this episode got deleted, but The first thing that they did, the first thing his church did is called in the survivor, asked for their side of the story, and then called in the abuser and said, we want to hear your side of the story. All of us in advocacy, all of us, every single person I know who is an advocate says that you never investigate a criminal offense yourself, ever. We are not investigators. Churches are not
I just shake my
investigators.
head because it's like so far from what you should
You
do.
don't call
Yeah,
the abuser in.
no.
I didn't call my
And-
dad in and say, now let me tell you the
Yeah.
charges that are being, lobbied against you. I didn't say that. I said, you and I, let's call the police
Yes.
and let
And
them
let
investigate
them take
this.
care of this.
We're
Out
not
of
investigators.
Out of our hands. Absolutely.
So number one, believe survivors and withhold that temptation to investigate, to hear both sides of the story. When there's a criminal allegation, it is not your job to call in the alleged abuser and to get their side of the story. Don't do it.
It's
Do
kind
not
of
do
weird
it.
anyway when you think about it, Jimmy. I think of a criminal act such as murder. If somebody witnessed a murder and they saw, say, Uncle Joe murder someone, and you go tell someone, why would they call Uncle Joe in and say, did you murder him? Of course
Right.
he's not going to say,
Right.
sure, I murdered
Right.
him and this is how I did it. And by the way, I murdered Aunt Jane and Aunt Sally
Right.
too. It's ridiculous.
Exactly
It just
right.
makes zero sense.
Yeah, resist
Zero.
that temptation. It's not a smart practice. It's not a wise practice.
Well,
it goes
legally, it
against,
can mess the whole case up.
exactly
too.
right. It can
Mess it up
really,
from the
throw
whole
an
way
investigation.
through. Yeah, absolutely.
and it makes the church very liable.
Oh, yeah.
If you call in to investigate and see if this person actually did it, to hear their side of the story.
Nope.
I mean, you want to talk about liability shooting through the roof. It is just
Right.
not a good practice. So don't do it. Number one, believe survivors. Number two, let the survivor tell their story, even if it makes you look bad. There are things
Yeah.
that I did, when this all unfolded, when we reported my dad. Of course, there are things that I did that I go back and I'm like, man, I wish I would have done things differently. If one of his survivors wanted to tell their story and it made me look bad, and there were certain things that I failed to do throughout that process, I still need to give them that
Exactly,
opportunity to
right.
tell their
Yes,
story,
yeah.
even if it makes me look bad.
And something we need to remember is this isn't about us. It's about the other person.
That's right.
It doesn't matter how we look. They need to get out what has gone on. And it doesn't matter. I did things strangely weird as a mother, I am sure, when I heard about my own children's abuse. I didn't have right answers or anything. I didn't have right questions, but I was able to do one thing: keep my mouth quiet and listen.
Yeah.
That's when I knew I did the right thing. Beyond that, no, I didn't know what to do. We don't know. We don't always make the right things, moves in a situation like this, or the right comments or anything. But we can all listen. We have 2 ears made for listening.
But I think here's the important point, is that if you have nothing to hide, it's okay to make mistakes.
Right.
I mean, it's
Yes.
okay for churches, the institutions,
Yes.
the leaders, whoever, individuals. It's
Right.
okay to make mistakes.
Right.
It really is. But if you have nothing to hide, why go to that length to bully somebody into silence?
Yep.
If they want to tell their truth, even if it makes us look bad, if you have nothing to hide, let them tell their story.
Kind of like that perfect house with the white picket fence, the perfect family. And I've used this illustration many times before. We were called that family. It would have been, Jimmy, so easy, I guess, when Alex came to us and disclosed what she did, to say, you are to tell nobody about this. We are an encouragement to so many people as a tight-knit family. We don't want to mess things up here, Alex. We don't want to mess. Isn't that basically what the church is saying?
But here's the thing: it wouldn't have been easy to do
It
that
will.
because we have nothing to hide.
No,
You know.
but isn't that basically what these churches are saying? You abused person, you just need to keep quiet.
Yeah, this would
We are a
discourage so many
functioning
people.
church, right? We don't want to cause a split. We don't want to discourage people. They don't need to know what's going on. They don't
Yeah.
need to know all these details. Just keep quiet.
Yeah.
And, and you're right, that's not the easy road, but to some people, I think it is. It feels like it should be.
I mean, that literally only makes sense if you have a lot to hide. That's the only way that makes sense. To bully somebody into silence, especially who's endured abuse,
right.
the only thing that makes sense in my mind is you have a lot to hide.
You got it. You got it.
I mean, otherwise, why do it? It makes no sense.
Right. Exactly.
It makes no sense. Number 3, what can you do as a church or institution? Ask what you can do to do better. If a survivor is telling their story and they're saying, look, I was badly injured by the way the church handled this, the simplest solution is to say, okay, help us to see where we failed you.
How can we do better?
Right.
Yeah.
And how can we do better? What can we do?
Right. Exactly.
Not, well, you're making the church look bad and, we're going to threaten you with a lawsuit if you...
Just go away.
Yep.
Yeah, just go away.
Why don't you forgive and move on? Get rid of the bitterness in your heart.
Right.
That makes no sense. Again, if you have nothing to hide, an honest person will admit their faults and will at least be open to the idea to hear somebody say, you guys really injured me.
Right.
If you're an honest person, you'll be open to that and not take that as criticism. And I don't think the survivors mean it as criticism. No. They're just saying, look, you really injured me and you need to do better.
Right.
If you're an honest person, you'll be open to that and say, what can I do to do better? Number 4, and I think this is vital, ask for the survivor's help. Okay, you're saying that we failed you at all these different corners. How can you help us to do better so that somebody in your position never goes through the pain that you went through again?
I think you have been saying this, Jimmy, from the very first year of our podcast, from the very first episode. Ask for the help of the survivors. This is new territory that we're charting with a survivor. Ask them, how can we help? How can we do better? How do we make things better in the future for others? How do we make things better for you? What do we need to learn? What do we need to do? How do we do this? Help us out.
Yeah.
And that's easy to ask for help.
It really is. I mean, if you're an honest person, it's not that hard.
A lot of people let pride get in their way. They feel like they're in charge and you're just below there. And doesn't that happen a lot in the authoritarian world of the church?
In that culture of the authoritarian leaders where they know all.
Right. There's no asking for
everything has to go through the leadership.
Right.
All decisions, big or little, have to go through the appropriate channels. They all have to go through the leadership. And not only does it have to go through the leadership, but the leadership decides. They decide. You don't decide. The leaders decide whether we're gonna go this route or not.
Which I mean is really messed up.
It is. That is the definition of authoritarian leadership. And then number 5, finally, what can churches do? Ask what the survivor needs. What do you need to happen? That's not a hard question.
You know what? If we're being honest, Jimmy, in any painful, hurtful situation, if you ask a person or if you ask me, what do you need? What would make this better? The long and the short of it is just simply love me as I am. That's it. Take me as I am and love me. Isn't that what Jesus does with us. He starts out where we are, very broken, and loves us as we are, loves us into health. I
Mm-hmm.
guess that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
We're broken. Anybody who's been hurt is broken in spirit. And there isn't a physical, I think often we're looking for this type of thing. Well, visit me once a week, give me 2 phone calls a week. Can you drop off a meal once a week? That's not what a hurt person is going to say.
Mm-hmm.
They're simply looking for someone to love them as they are. That's all. Whatever that means. That,
And wherever they are. And
yes.
I
Yeah.
remember one of my dad's survivors. It said, "You know what I need? I need to go.
There
I
you go.
can't
There you
physically
go.
I can't
There you
physically
go. Right.
be in this building. There are too many triggers. There are too many
Right.
memories, bad memories. It is too much of a burden to bear to be inside these four walls." And I said, "Go."
You got it.
That
You
will
understood.
never
You
ever
understood.
change
Right. You understood.
my respect
Right.
for you. In fact, my
Right.
respect goes up when you're able to express yourself and say, "This is what I need."
Well, that's you
By all means.
extended love and compassion at the level of where that person
Yeah.
was, and that's what that person needed. Will that person ever come back? I don't know. That kind of compassion
That's irrelevant.
is
I mean,
healing, right?
yeah.
And you are so right. But there was healing in you saying, "Whatever it takes,
Yeah.
whatever it
And
takes."
I made it a point to say, "You don't need my permission or my blessing to go.
Right.
You go where you need to go."
Often,
And
when we are that deeply wounded, there isn't a step 1, 2, 3 to helping a person heal. We often need time alone to just sit on the ash heap, and while we're doing so, just to know that there are people there who accept us sitting on that ash heap,
yeah.
that understand, that get it, that give us the time
Yeah.
and the space to do that. But
Yeah, I mean the things that my dad's survivors never heard. They never heard, "You need to forgive him." They were never asked, "Have
Right.
you forgiven him?"
no,
That is
not in the picture.
not
No.
even on my. It's not on my mind. It's not on my lips. These questions are so much better. What can we do to do better? Can I get your help as a survivor? Can I solicit your help to make a better policy to make this place safer? What do you need? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking, and we need to be learning from the survivors, not saying, "Well, we're the leaders, and so here's what's going to happen next." That's one of those.
Just makes me shudder.
It's such a
It just
forceful
really does. Yeah.
positioning of church leaders, and even if they mean well, to say, "All right, here's what's going to happen next." Just by saying that is such an arrogant thing, and they need to say, what can we do better?
I am going to use an example that's very current in your life and in mine. I was visiting your sister in the hospital a couple weeks ago, and a travel nurse was in charge of all these tubes and lines and everything that was hooked up to your sister. And when she was in the room, she took it upon herself to explain what was going to go on. And a lot of it involved your sister's should have been her permission to do this. And instead of that nurse looking at her and saying, "Is it okay if we do this? And is it okay if we follow this pattern? And is it okay if we change this for your comfort? Or how do you feel about that?" She just went, "We're doing this, this, and this." Never one time asking her. And it irritated me so bad that I said, "How about looking at her and asking her, how does she feel about that? She's the one laying in pain,
Right.
not you."
Right.
She's
Exactly
the
right.
one. It's her body. that's laying there in pain. How do you get to make every decision
Yeah.
on that? And that's like you see a wounded person and you have these church authorities saying, here's how it's going to be. You're going to keep quiet. You're not going to say anything. We will run an investigation. We will let you know if this is true or not.
Yeah.
And you will forgive the abuser and sit next to that person in church, by the way, which you and I know has been done and has been. It's just crazy.
Well, I mean, to take that analogy a little bit farther, it's like the doctor coming in or the nurse or whatever when the patient's in the bed and then bullying them on top of that
Right.
and saying,
Yep.
you shut your mouth about
Yeah.
this.
Yep.
I don't want to hear about your
Right.
pain.
Yep. I don't want to hear it.
Your stomach hurts?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't care.
Don't
You need to
talk
keep
about
quiet.
it.
Only
Yeah.
talk about positive things here.
Oh boy.
You're making the
And that's a
doctors
great-
look bad
that is a
because
great
they've been
example.
treating
That
you.
is a great
These
yes.
doctors have been treating
Yes.
you,
Yes.
and by your saying that you're still
Yes.
in pain, you're making our doctors look bad.
That's a great example, Jimmy. Thank you.
I mean, can you imagine?
No. Well,
And I know, sadly, that happens in
it's
hospitals
awful.
too.
It just makes you crazy. It does.
But this is what churches look like when they do this kind of stuff. And
Right.
trust me, I mean, it doesn't make churches look good
It's
when they're
not
bullying
always
and
trying.
intimidating.
Well, it's a prideful thing. I think a lot. Often more so than even trying to hide something. It's prideful. We are in charge, and we will tell you how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Just like that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I
That's
love what you've
makes
come up with. I
churches look bad.
love the questions. I love the suggestions here. I hope that you will put those in writing at the end of the podcast so people can see that.
Yeah, we'll put them in the description.
Okay. Wonderful.
But this is not rocket science. And
No, it
that's-
isn't. But
I guess that's the truth bomb for the day. It's not rocket science to take care of injured people.
right.
When people have been badly hurt by other people, don't walk on the opposite side of the road. Stop. Talk to them. Let them tell their story. Let them talk about their pain. It's not your job to make the church look good. It's your job to help injured people.
Amen.
Well, thank you guys for tuning into this episode. We're so grateful for you, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.